Hello, and welcome back to AP Human Geography. Today, what we want to talk about are the higher order economic activities. So these are the things beyond just collecting resources out of nature. We've already talked about the primary activities, right? And this is where you are using, extracting, harvesting natural resources. So what we want to do is identify the activities that go with processing, selling, services, all of that. And so it turns out that there are not just primary activities, there are secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and quinary activities. And I've put in some graphics for you to kind of have an idea of what those mean, right? And so the secondary activities are going to be things that are going to involve processing the natural resources into something else. And that could be making steel out of iron, that could be processing flour from wheat, right? Whatever. The tertiary activities don't go into gathering or processing. These are going to be more service oriented. Okay, and then the quaternary activities, these are going to be the knowledge-based activities. Okay, so these are things that don't really have anything to do with the goods, but they have to do with society, right, and making society run. And then, of course, any of the educational type jobs. And then the quinary sector, these are going to be the really high skill level activities, and these are often called gold collar, and we'll talk about those in just a second. So here's your first question. Which of the following would not be considered a tertiary activity? Hotel concierge, teacher, banker, nurse, or mechanic? Well, the answer to this one is teacher, right? The tertiary jobs, remember, are service-oriented, and that can range from sales to healthcare to, well, anything that's service-oriented. So, but teacher, that would fall under education, and so that would actually be a quaternary activity, okay? And so when you look at the traditional here's just another graphic that I put in so you can kind of get an idea. Now let's talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. Secondary activities, manufacturing essentially. We've talked a little bit about this before, right? And so we know that the secondary activities probably need to be located somewhere where they can really utilize the raw materials that they are processing, okay? And so we have these principles that go into the locational decisions of manufacturing, and the factors from this previous slide, these locational decisions, are all part of what? Rostow's model, Weber's least cost theory, Christoller's central place theory, von Thunen's agricultural model, or the core periphery model. All of these you have to know, by the way, because we've talked about them. Well, if you recall to the Daisy Company steel expansion that we looked at, these would all be part of Weber's least cost theory. And so when we were building a new factory, we were actually looking at secondary activities. And you can see the major manufacturing regions around the world really do center around the primary resources. And of course, the best example of that, and the one we've talked about, is American steel, right? And so we had the steel and auto industry. Although interestingly enough, we also know now that because of changes in transportation, labor, all of those things, that American cars really aren't necessarily American anymore. Ford is currently assembled in Mexico, although in here I have a picture of a Jaguar made in the UK by Ford. And then there's the Japanese Nissan plant in Tennessee. We're just opening up the Toyota plant here in North Texas. The Geo Metro is made in Japan, but it's marketed by GM, which is an American company. And so there's really a globalization of all of these things. And so that idea that the secondary activities have to be really tied to the primary activities is not entirely true anymore, although the cost really does matter. Okay. Now, tertiary activities, these are our services. They're going to be mostly related to the day-to-day needs of people and to the usual range of functions that are found in towns and cities. Okay. Business, labor, right? These are going to be things that cater to the business sectors or to the general community, these primary and secondary sectors, or to individuals. And so retailers, personal service providers, those are going to locate where the market density is greatest. So in this case, our tertiary activities, they're not going to be located necessarily near the primary and secondary activities. They're going to be located where people are, right? Because that's that's who they're going to be dealing with. Okay, and so again, that's going to be towns and cities. And I've put in here, I think this is a very cool infographic that talks about fashion, right? Talks about clothes. Where are they made? Where are they marketed? Who, who's buying all of them? And so I want you to take a look at this and read through it. And then if you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Now, this also is going to include the global financial institution. So it's not just like services in that respect that we've been talking about, but it's also going to be all of your banks, all of the financial institutions. And there are some global financial institutions. And so I just put these in here because, well, you need to know them. So the World Bank makes loans, the International Monetary Fund increases money flow throughout the world, and the World Trade Organization sets the rules of trade. Now, not everybody has to participate by these, but that's how you get things like sanctions and stuff. But ideally, everybody agrees to cooperate globally, right? But we know that doesn't always work out. But I've put in yet another fun infographic that talks about the financial institutions and how they work sort of a little bit together globally. So please read through this, and if you have questions, ask me in class. Okay. Now, the quaternary activities, these are going to be advanced forms of services. They're going to require specialized knowledge, technical skills, communication, or administration. Okay. These are going to be unbound by any locational requirements, really, because these are things that can be transmitted electronically, right? And so the client base doesn't have to be spatially adjacent, right? And so you can have global networks that rely only on these kind of electronic communications, right? Because it's communication dependent. Now, here's just an example. Here's Silicon Valley in California. These are some of the quaternary activities that have to do actually directly with things like communication. And then quaternary activities, these are the gold collar professions I was talking about earlier. These are the special and sort of well, they're the specialized skills. And so these are going to be your top business executives, your government officials, although one could argue that that may not actually be a special skill. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. All right. Research scientists, financial specialists, legal consultants, things like that. And these are, there are not as many of these as there are, say, all of the others. Yeah. So here's your next question. Working in a higher economic sector results in a higher income, true or false? Well, that's definitely false. I mean, if you look at just the tertiary activities, you have ranges of salaries from mechanics, blue-collar workers, teachers, nurses, police, firefighters, all of these that are on the lower end of the pay scale, all the way up to, bankers, right? The investment bankers and things like that are making a lot of money. So there is a wide range. It does not matter what sector you're in. You can, that's not going to, your income's not going to be dependent on that. Okay. Here's some quaternary locations, the Research Triangle in North Carolina, and then Medicon Valley, which is in Denmark, Sweden, kind of conglomerate there, and that's all biotech. And the reason I put these in here is because a lot of these will cluster around together because they can share information that way. They can work together, and that's kind of convenient for them. Okay. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about is Rostow's model, right? And this is about development. Okay. And so when you look at these activities, this is really focused around these economic activities. And so you start out with your traditional society where you have limited technology. Okay. And then you have this transition. Usually it's going to be triggered by an external influence, right? And then this gives you the preconditions for taking off economically. And so you may have this commercial exploitation of the primary activities. Then you move into the ability to add secondary activities, and that's going to be the development of a manufacturing sector. Then, because you have these two activities going on, you're going to need the tertiary activities, which is going to widen your base, right? It's going to widen the services that are going to be required, and that's the drive to maturity. And then you finally reach this mature level, which is the high mass consumption, and this is where you're going to have a full complement of tertiary activities, quaternary activities, and quinary activities. Okay, so the Rostow linear stages model is what that's called, and it's similar to which other model that you may be familiar with? Balanced growth theory, trickle-down theory, demographic transition, or the Lewis dual sector model? This is actually related to the demographic transition model. Rostow is looking at it in terms of economic development through labor, right? Whereas the demographic transition model talks about economics in terms of birth rates and death rates, and we'll be talking about that in the next unit. All right, so this was a short one. If you have any questions, let me know in class, or you can put them on the Google Doc question board, and that's it. Thanks for listening.